Yeah. Ma'am, yeah. Ma'am, the government has shown admirable fiscal restraint over the past year. We've had this fantastic corporate tax cut over the past month. Do you see a similar reform for personal income tax as well in the future?
You can see one, surely, but am I doing it? I can't say no.
I think it's...
Okay. Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Mic is already on.
So we have enough time, so we will come to everybody.
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. So the media and your political opponents are very quick to criticize demonetization. Could you please give us your view of the effects of demonetization, both positive and negative? And secondly, does it make sense to take the learnings from demonetization and potentially do another round in a new and improved way?
There was every reason for the demonetization to have been taken up. Our government was committed to... Are you able to hear me?
Sorry. What is this?
Yeah, I found it. See, when in 2014 the Prime Minister, the BJP-led NDA was elected, we had very strongly during the campaign made a case for containing black money. In fact, pursuing all those pending cases against money held outside the country, held without due taxes being paid. Not that one was against holding money outside, but if it was accounted for, there wasn't an issue. So it was an electoral promise given, and therefore steps had to be taken. And demonetization was one of the very important steps taken in order to contain black money. Black money, together with the fact that many of the transactions of the Indian economy was not under any institutional radar. Transactions were happening, but you had no clue. You couldn't establish the money trail. Taxes were not paid. In other words, one step was to, through demonetization, remove or flush out certain currencies from the market, but also after that, make sure that every money comes into the bank, which is what we wanted people to do, that by 30th of that year, December, you would come and put that money into the account. And if all explanations are given, no worries, your money is safe. If not, one would be pursued to find out where the money came. In other words, establish that it was accounted, tax-paid money or not. Post that, in order that transactions no longer remain beyond any institutional framework, digitization has been given a big push. So transactions now either happen through checks, which is now completely going out of the system. You're doing a digital transaction or using your phone, which will be either with thumb impression or with QR code and so on. The movement of digitization itself is moving so rapidly that what I would have said a couple of months ago is very different from what I'll say tomorrow. So the best thing about demonetization was that at one stroke, we fulfilled one of our promises and also simultaneously brought India to the digital realm of things. And therefore, it was the right measure to take, and post which you're able to see that a lot of transformational changes are happening in the financial, institutional level.
Okay. Okay, let's go there.
Government, thank you for being here. The government has gotten points for rooting out corruption, as you just mentioned, and for taking advances on the social front. But when I speak to Indian entrepreneurs, they're frustrated about the disconnect between the government and the entrepreneurial endeavor, i.e. there's a lack of trust, I hear, from Indian entrepreneurs in terms of the ease of doing business on a day-to-day basis. Can you speak to that, and are there any efforts that Modi 2 can take to tackle these concerns? Thank you.
Efforts at making doing business a bit more easier, or to make it systematic so that due diligence doesn't become a frustrating experience. The federal government can take a lot of measures, which is what we are doing since 2014. But to a large extent, where businesses are in the provinces, obviously the federal government takes decisions which impact decisions which are taken in the states as well, and for businesses which are located in provinces. But decisions taken in the provincial level is the second layer. So many of the decisions taken at the center in the parliament will have to find their way down to the provinces and then to the local bodies. That's taken a bit of a time, I must admit. But we are trying to get the states on board, and that is why, like the way the World Bank met, do a rank of all the countries on where we are on ease of doing business. But within India, we do have a program through which states compete with each other to say we are better off in order to bring in greater ease for business. And that kind of a step has been a daring step to take without making states appear that they're scrambling for something. It had to become a healthy competition among states so that they each compete with other to be better than the other one in order to make it easier for businesses to come in. So it is an exercise which is consuming a lot of time, but people have got the spirit of it now, and I expect the changes from now on to be a lot more rapid.
Okay, come here. Go ahead. Yeah.
Ma'am, so there's no doubt that the Indian economy has done better since the NDA came to power in 2014, but you obviously had to face your fair share of criticism globally. I recently came across a lecture delivered by Dr. Raghuram Rajan at Brown University, and one of the points he mentioned was, why did Modi 1 not do better on the economy? Because the government is extremely centralized and the leadership does not appear to have a consistent articulated vision on how to achieve economic growth. What would be your view on this?
It has several layers of observation. Let me put it that way. And I would want you to give me the benefit of reading it over again so that I can jot it down and I give you a pointed reply. Would you please do that again?
Should I read it out again?
Yeah, read it out again.
I'm sure. Because the government is extremely centralized and the leadership does not appear to have a consistent articulated vision on how to achieve economic growth.
I'm taking a minute to respond. Because I do respect Raghuram Rajan as a great scholar who chose to be in the central bank in India at a time when the Indian economy was all buoyant. But yet, I cannot but mention it now that the banks in India, and you are all aware, only a few days ago, The Economist has written about the state of Indian banks. But yet, to link with a statement, it was in his time that loans were given just based on phone calls from crony leaders. And public sector banks in India till today are depending on government's equity infusion to get out of that mire. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. And I'm sure Dr. Raghuram Rajan will agree that Dr. Manmohan Singh would have had a consistent, articulated vision for India. With due respects, I'm not making fun of anybody. But I certainly want to put this forward for a comment which has come like this. I have no reason to doubt that Dr. Raghuram Rajan feels for every word of what he's saying. And I am here today giving him his due respect, but also placing the fact before you that Indian public sector banks did not have a worse phase than when the combination of Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Raghuram Rajan as Prime Minister and the Governor of Reserve Bank had. At that time, none of us knew about it. There was an asset quality review which Dr. Raghuram Rajan did, which I'm very happy about, very grateful that he did it. But I'm sorry. Can all of us put together also think of as to what ails our banks today? Where has it been inherited from? So it's very well. Dr. Bhagwati is here, Dr. Panagriya is here. I'm sure there are many more economists among us who can take a view of what prevails today or what prevailed 50 years ago. But I would also want answers for the time when Dr. Raghuram Rajan was in the governor's post, speaking about the Indian banks, for which today to give a lifeline is the primary duty of the Finance Minister of India. And the lifeline, kind of an emergency, has not come overnight. So if there is a feeling that there's been a centralized leadership now, I like to say that very democratized leadership led to a whole lot of corruption. Very democratized leadership. The Prime Minister, after all, is the first among equals in any cabinet. We've, after all, inherited the Westminster, haven't we? You need to have a country as diverse as India with effective leadership. A rather too democratic leadership, which probably will have the approval of quite a lot of liberals, I'm afraid, left behind such a nasty stink of corruption, which we are cleaning up even today. So, very well, I respect his views, but if I'm given the opportunity now that you've given me an opportunity, I like to give my view, with due respects to Dr. Raghuram Rajan and his knowledge.
Well, you know, the next time you go to hear Raghuram Rajan, you got your question. Yes, okay, let's go to that corner there, up there. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Panagriya. Madam Minister, the current morass in the finance sector, banks and non-banks, you very correctly identified with legacy of prior issues of political patronage, crony capitalism, some issues of development lending, which is inevitable, and just speculation, whether it's real estate or a variety of other factors. How does one address these issues without, as quoting the article that you addressed, stifling the genuine needs for finance and not sort of making everybody now so conservative in terms of lending that it stifles the development, genuine development needs of the country?
Well, I suppose as soon as our government was elected in 2014, and once the public sector banks and their situation, the level of NPAs, the overdue accounts, the cronies, all that came out, there was this general fear among officials in banks that they wouldn't want to take any decision because for fear that everyone will be clubbed together. Those taking legitimate decisions and those who helped out cronies will all be treated the same. And therefore, for a couple of years after 2014, we were toiling with a situation where banks and their genuine decision-making suffered. People were remaining calm, thinking it doesn't matter whether I take a call or not. At least I wouldn't face the risk of being clubbed together with people who had taken unfair decisions. It took a while for us to give them the confidence back, saying a genuine decision made on bona fide considerations should never be pulled up, and that kind of an assurance the Prime Minister himself had given, saying banks should not now feel paralyzed, they should move forward. So that took a bit of a time, and now we've additionally infused equity capital for growth and for their own other purposes. We've amalgamated some banks which were not so sustainable. And more than anything else, the perception that the Indian economy is without adequate liquidity has been addressed. I was just telling a few journalists who met me this afternoon that in the last about 30, 40 days ago, I met up with all these banks and told them that you are sitting with quite a lot of liquidity. Would you please go out there, do an outreach program, bring all the NBFCs, the non-banking financial companies who take the money from you and go further lending, all of them together, make sure the retail credit seeker and also agriculture and various different home mortgage or vehicle buying, everybody could come there, follow the due KYC norms, the prudential norms, and get the loans if they so desired. I'm happy to tell you that within 9 days, when the outreach program was held in 200 districts, an amount more than 80,000 crores of Indian rupees has been given out as credit to those who want it. Some directly by the banks, but some through the NBFCs with whom they are linked. The second phase of this program shall be held from 21st October for the next 3-4 days, well before Diwali. So credit crunch or issues of banks being lethargic are all gotten over.
Thank you. Very good. You should.
Yesterday, when it was announced that Professor Abhijit Banerjee has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics along with two other, he had a press conference at MIT, and in which he was asked a question about the Indian economy, the state of the Indian economy. His exact words were, the Indian economy is doing very badly, and that when the economy is in a tailspin, the focus should be on not so much on monetary stability, but demand. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what he has to say about the Indian economy.
Well, on demand, that is where I've given you an elaborate answer now as to how to prime consumption. I've taken the step to push liquidity further through the NBFCs and through the banks to reach the ground. And in the budget itself in July, we had announced 100 lakh crores of Indian rupee for the next 5 years for building public infrastructure, government spending on infrastructure, which means it is going to boost consumption. Money in the hands of people in situ, wherever their projects are on. And for that, we've even formed a task force which will help me front load a large part of this money. I'm not waiting to evenly spread it over 5 years. I'm willing to front load it even as the projects come through. So in order to boost consumption is what we're doing.
And the recent tax cut should go in the same direction, leaves a lot more in the hands of the corporates to invest. So investment is also demand. I think, when we say demand, we think only of consumption as the demand, but investment is also demand. Okay, right?
So, Madam, in terms of investments, what are your thoughts of having a stable, at least a medium-term stable tax regime for investors? In the last couple of years, we have seen significant changes both in the tax policy and rates for long-term capital gain. dividend distribution tax, which is unique to India, the new super surcharge, the STT which was there. It has been constantly changing every budget or you rectify it after the budget or whatever it is over the last 3-4 years. As strong investors for India, it makes our decision making very difficult, especially if we are looking at long-term investments. What are your thoughts on that?
I fully agree, and we are on the course for making it all predictable and sure and simple.
Thank you.
Okay.
My question is about financial inclusion and the zero savings account. So these are women who have these accounts, but what we have is Mahila Bachat Gat, and they also have within their group they have crisis credit lending, etc. So tying up with some of the other program, which is housing for all or toilets for all, what we are now moving into is a phase when the maintenance is required for this housing, and this is something collective. So with the savings, like if we look at in United States, large banks like Wells Fargo Bank, they are actually creating fake accounts, and they're being penalized for that. But in our country, we have like these millions of small savings account, not to be confused with microfinance, but these small saving accounts. How can these people's Bachat Gat can have this collective bargaining, and how can they actually participate into this housing for all and toilets for all programs, so they have some capital, instead of that going to HUDCO or some agency, come to the people so that they can maintain and they can sustain on their own?
Well, at this stage, what has been provided is not based on collective bargaining at all. It's been given as a right to every citizen. So in a village, whoever is left without a toilet has been given one. So it has not been taken as a demand for entitlement or a right. It's more as a duty that the government has to provide the facility. And in order to have sustainable water and other maintenance related matter, the ministry which has been created, the Jal Shakti ministry, is also looking at effective use of water, effective use of water for drinking, water for sanitation, and water for irrigation. So the sustainability principle is kept in mind even as you're designing what you're providing to areas like toilets, because not everywhere does the flush with water toilets work, because you don't know the water source, you don't have the link to a water source, sustainable water source. So that's been the guiding principle of every such scheme which has been launched by the government.
Yeah. Back there, young lady.
Madam Minister, wondering how you would characterize the current state of trade talks between New Delhi and Washington. I think there was this hope that during the Prime Minister Modi's visit to the U.S. that some type of trade deal would come together.
I think the trade talks will conclude sooner. The talks are going on very well. Yes, we couldn't conclude it much before the Prime Minister's visit happened, but both sides are engaged with all commitment to have it done soon.
Okay, lady here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today and speaking to us. I'm curious to learn that over 60% of our population in India is less than 35 years old. So I'm curious to learn about how the Modi government is going to work towards bringing these people in the workforce, and what other opportunities are they trying to create?
First of all, I think the emphasis is on skilling them even before they leave their first educational institution. In the sense, after school, the first college they would enter, the course that they do, and the course content also in bringing in an element of skill are being driven through the HRD, Human Resource Development Department. Other than that, the moment they finish the course and they would want to go into or join the workforce, clusters are being made now of entrepreneurs who can train them in a particular skill which might be required and is relevant for that cluster. Even there, the government participates with those organizations. I'll take the example of two different places. One, the place where I had studied, Tiruchi, where there is a Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited, which spawned a lot of ancillary units who were supplying parts to these people. They were all private sector. Now the BHEL has gone into a global tender mode, and everybody can compete from wherever they are, and many of them sometimes don't make the cut. But the SMEs who are all around as ancillary units gradually realize that they have to improve on their techniques of production, and today they have now caught up with the game and they are able to compete as a conglomerate of these small, because issue is of scaling up. Even if they want to bid successfully, they can't because their size is small. Now they've all come together to bid as a group and even answer questions on scaling up. Now this cluster has thrown up a very good possibility of young ITI type students who are not engineering college but less than that, who get some kind of a certification and come, are taken up by these people, this cluster of ancillaries, who train them for the kind of skills that they should have, and assume, and this number was given by the ancillaries themselves, if there are 500 of them brought in for training, at least 200 is recruited by their own units, and the rest of them are ready to go anywhere. And many of them have moved even to cities like Jamshedpur or Bhilai, places where there are larger units. Skilling today is not something which government is doing on its own in its myopic kind of a way, but it's linked very much with the ground. So you have this as an example. The other example is Codicea, which is an association of smaller manufacturers, all helping the textile units of Coimbatore. Even they've come up with some such a scheme, which the government is happy to participate with. So the government has very clearly understood that it is not just for the government and its units to do this unless it's opened up for such clusters. Meaningful skilling cannot happen. So we've adopted that as a model, and therefore are confident that a large section of those who are going to go into employment will be adequately trained.
But
thank you very much for your very informative talk.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have a question about Indian agriculture. It would seem to me that in the last 3 to 4 years at least, so far as I know, Indian agriculture has performed very well with abundant food supplies, helping the Reserve Bank of India to keep an expansionary monetary policy, keeping inflation low. Would you tell us something about the Indian agricultural performance? Has it been transformed in some way? Is it performing so well?
Ma'am, you're right. The Indian agriculture has seen transformational change, more to the credit of the farmers who have really found ways to last through any climatic adversity. You have today pockets within India which have excelled in becoming exemplary exporters. For instance, Kutch in Gujarat has become the biggest horticultural center. And if all of us, I'm sure all of us are familiar with the terrain of Kutch. A few years ago, we wouldn't have thought a blade of grass can grow there. Subsequent to somewhat some Sabarmati river water reaching there, and also the enterprise of the farmers there, today it's biggest horticultural export hub. And the mango from there, the Kesar, is one of the biggest sought after mangoes which are being sold from India. So if that is example Kutch, there are such examples all over the country. Madhya Pradesh has now become the biggest exporter of that quality of tomatoes which are required for making ketchups. Similarly, there is a pocket in Rajasthan which is competing globally for export of olives. You know the story of guava gum, the cluster beans, which are used for producing a certain lubricant, which is used in the aerospace industries. Rajasthan excels in the production of guava gums, which relates to the gum export. Mustard, spices, cashew, pomegranates from Nashik, grapes from Nashik. So I can list out. India is the second largest banana producer. And not all bananas from India are exported, mind you. We produce more than 300 varieties of banana, but that which gets exported is that one thing which has got to be yellow, 18 inches and 0.2 centimeters, whatever. You know, that description. Our exports are so governed by these kind of unbelievable restrictions which don't speak for the flavor or the quality of a product. It's only the look, lovely wax-colored, coated. So even in that we seem to be excelling. If only you ask me, all the bananas can be exported, you will see what the world of banana has to offer us. But we don't. So anyway, yeah, Indian agriculture.
So you've been waiting. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. In 1985, former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi made a famous remark that out of every 1 rupee issued from the central government, only 15 paisa, which is like 15% of the money, reaches to the poor. In DBT, while you mentioned that the millions of accounts have $10 billion, it is also worth mentioning that $20 billions were saved from pilferages and leakages, which were otherwise going, and you know what I mean, right? So, what's your take on that, and how do you see it going forward? How to make it 10x? Thank you.
Well, you're right. It helped us contain pilferages. Ghost accounts which were receiving the monies can no longer receive them. And in more than one ways now, India is keen on having Aadhaar seeded accounts which can directly receive the entitlement. And we have clearly seen benefits of it in the savings that we are able to make. And now that shall expand to include every Indian.
Okay, are you there? Back in the last row.
Honorable Finance Minister, we'd like to hear your comments on the non-profit sector on the economy.
On the non-profit sector of the economy?
Yeah, in terms of current policies, in terms of either positive impact or negative impact on the economy, non-profit sector, religious institutions in India, and the economy.
Well, they continue like ever before.
Sorry?
They continue like ever before. Is there anything in particular that you had in your mind when you asked that question?
I mean, the tax exempt status, I heard that tax exempt status may be revoked for some of the non-profit entities. My question is pointed in that direction.
Well, if there's anything, you'll hear it during the budget.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming. I don't think this is working. My question is about the Kashmir lockdown, and there's a lot of...
No, sorry. No political questions here.
No, it's not a political question.
This is all... I think you came a bit late, and you didn't hear my
It's not a political question,
rules.
though.
You didn't hear my ground rules that we are going to stay with the economy, which is what...
So it's not a political question at all.
No, but does it have something to do with the economy?
Yes.
Then you can ask.
Yeah. So the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and other statistics have shown that there's apparently a cost of around $1 billion because of the lockdown. So how does the Indian economy plan to get its way around this loss?
One thing, except probably for the first week after the removal of 370, I don't understand what is meant by lockdown. There was nothing imposed, one. Second, there was never a protest for which a firing or a shootout should happen. Nothing of that happened either. The apple farmers could collect all their produce from their farms and keep it ready to be bought by the agents or the government or whoever. Like never before, the entire product, if anything, has been purchased by private or the public entrepreneurs. Apple in this season is the biggest economy for J&K. Yes, internet and related operations were curtailed, and it's no secret as to why it had to be curtailed. Considering the way in which Pakistan has been interfering with J&K, how, in fact, payments were being given for people who were stone pelters. Stone pelters, majority of the time, were school-going fellows. Monies were paid to them. So on the internet, we had to take measures just so that it doesn't lead to, amplification of rumor mongering and so on. So otherwise, the economy, the newspapers, everything were doing their routine business. Of course, there was a lot of monitoring by the security forces because we didn't want anything going wrong, people being hit or convoys being hit. So a temporary Article 370, which till now denied women of the state the inheritance, which denied the SCs of the state a constitutional right for affirmative action, which denied every tribal, the Bakarwal of that state, what positive and affirmative action gave them of the Indian Constitution, is now, after the removal of Article 370, which is a temporary article, going to enable us to provide all that to everybody. Denial of fundamental rights. Denying women inheritance from her father, for instance, just because she married somebody else from somewhere outside of her state, was also a serious human rights violation about which none of us spoke till now. Remove Article 370, human rights becomes a global buzzword. Where were we when women have been all these years denied property rights? Where were we when SCs were denied affirmative action? So I think if people are worried about the economy of J&K, they should be happy for it now, because at least everybody will get the same facility and as much investment for the development of state as is available for the rest of the states of the country. You didn't want a political question, but I've given a political answer.
Absolutely.
You didn't object to me.
Absolutely.
Professor,
How can we object to you?
Professor, question here.
Okay, Shadan.
Thank you, ma'am. So my question is regarding that preliminarily throughout year we have seen the issues related to like the tax harassment woes. Recently in the budget announcement speech, you announced about the faceless assessment, and it has been launched in 3 months, like just a few days back. So do you think that this has helped the initial reception with like businesses? There have been improvement on that front, and do you think that this will be instrumental going forward in improving the tax to GDP ratio of India? Thank you.
I can see a lot of positive reaction from the SSCs. Much before it came into force, people have already been saying that that will be a big relief, because any queries are welcome, but cut to the minimum the human interface. And that's what exactly has been achieved by this. It was on the cards for last 2 years. But now, after this budget, it has come into place within 3 months after that. I think it will do a lot of good towards compliance.
Okay.
Good evening, Minister. Nikhila Natarajan with Indo-Asian News Service. What is your government's strategic vision to ensure that whatever you do doesn't just address the slowdown in terms of aggregate demand, but also boosts incomes all around? Thank you.
Well, they're all interlinked. I can't say I'm doing this for that, which will not have an impact on income generation. So they're all interlinked. And when you're talking of expenditure for building public roads, you're increasing the demand for cement, you're increasing the demand for iron and steel, and those who are working in those areas will have their income go up. Similarly, when those who are engaged in construction, they are going to have their incomes boosted. And when I use the DBT to send monies directly to people's accounts, that is a supplement to their income, and so on. So I think they're not unlinked, they are necessarily linked.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. Microphone.
Thank you for coming. I had a question on something that you mentioned earlier. Do you believe the appropriation of RBI's reserves and disinvestment proceeds, which are mainly on the capital account, to fund the government's discretionary spending, which is mainly on the revenue account, makes economic sense?
Don't mind answering the question in a very official kind of a way, but I somehow don't appreciate the tone in which it has been asked. Appropriation? What do you mean? There is a committee which looks at what is the available surplus with RBI. And the committee is not with people like me. They are domain experts who know what is Reserve Bank and its fundamentals are, who respect the independence of that organization. And after that, they arrive at what is realizable surplus and what is notional surplus. And with all that taken on board, then fix a formula through which a reasonable amount of that realizable surplus is passed on to the government.
Okay.
So I don't think it is capital money being spent on, not at all. And it is not as if it is something which has happened just now. It's periodically governments do take money from Reserve Bank based on a formula. And the formulation is arrived with, and the formulation, if you want to compare, the formulation arrived this time is matching with some of the global best practices.
Okay, so, all right, yeah.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask that the question in respect of the public sector banks and the rising NPAs in the public sector banks. And there have been mergers in the past across the public sector banks. Now, in the absence of independent regulation from RBI for public sector banks, on which there's a dual kind of principal agent issue from the government and from the RBI, and the RBI don't have enough powers over the top, even over the top management of the public sector banks. By merging the public sector banks, aren't we creating more problems in the sense that they will become too big to fail and too big to be regulated in the absence of independent regulation?
The mergers have happened of banks which were rather too small and on their own who couldn't have expanded. And in the areas or the regions in which they were present, there weren't enough opportunity for both sides of the business of a bank to develop, receive deposits and also lend. So many of them were happily receiving a lot of deposit because in that region, savings was fine. But in the region in which, let us say, we're talking about, there wasn't a culture to take credit from the bank. These banks were saddled with all the deposits, but with no opportunity to do business by lending and earning. But they also had no scope to expand. As a result, many of these banks, credit was sitting, they couldn't use it. Whereas in any other region, for instance, Western region, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, you had banks which had their credit, had enough offtake as credit also going out, and therefore they could do business with the money they had. but they were also having a lot more demand for credit, which in order to serve, they had to borrow from other banks and bring in, thus making the whole business more expensive of lending money. So from the point of view of bank remaining stagnant to a bank which also has a potential, considerations were taken on board and then mergers have been effected. For a country like India, you need banks also to scale up. You can't have several of them, nothing stops from new banks coming up, but you can't have several banks being that which cannot take that kind of scale in demand. Therefore, the rationale of bringing such banks together have been carefully considered, not blindly brought together. But as regards the regulation of banks, as regards professionalizing banks, we've already taken a lot of steps and we will be taking further so that the top management and the leadership building, independence of top management, professionals coming into it are all being considered. Already provision has been made and we've made it compulsory for banks to appoint a risk assessing executive. And this person will be taken from the marketplace. He shall not be an officer from the Indian Administrative Service who's going to be appointed there. So that provision has already been made into the banks.
Okay, I think we will be winding down, so we will do 3 more questions. Back there, the young lady.
Me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Nirmala ji, my question is about manufacturing. So, outside of the Make in India initiative, what concrete and tangible steps is the government taking to boost Indian manufacturing even further for it to truly compete with China in the Asian market?
Well, it all goes through the Make in India only. We don't have too many scattered schemes. The focus is on Make in India to make India a manufacturing hub. Only we have prioritized on about 22 different sectors within that, like the defense production and many other such sectors where the potential exists, medical instrument devices, pharma, and so on. So where we are bringing in more investments, more technology, more joint ventures, so that the manufacturing in these specific areas can grow.
Okay.
Vanakkam, madam. My question is on the agriculture sector. So if you look at India's labor force, roughly about 45% of the labor force is engaged in agriculture, which only contributes to about 15 to 16% of the GDP. Now, frankly, this proportion is sustainable even in the present term, even in the long term. If you look at US, it's about 5%. If you look at China, it's about 20%, and they're trying to reduce that. So is there a concrete effort on part of the government to, does the government recognize that to be a problem? And if yes, is there a concrete effort on part of the government to see how labor mobility can be facilitated from agriculture to sectors like, say, manufacturing?
I'm not sure it is as simplistic as that. I understand that there is an over-dependence on agriculture. There's complete underemployment. And if agriculture has got to be competitive, you need to have less people depend on it. All that. But is it to move the surplus to manufacturing? Does it mean that manufacturing located in urban areas are the only answer? No. There are a whole lot of different things happening now. Not just agriculture, but allied activities which had been on the books for a very long time in India but did not get any support are being given a lot of support now. So it is the blue economy, the dairy, the beekeeping, the processing, all of which have been in the India census, calculation every time, did not so much focus on these allied activities. Now what we are doing is to give emphasis to these allied activities so that They are not just supplementing incomes, they have become main source of income themselves. So the rural population, which staying where they were, merely engaging in agriculture, probably was the main reason why you had this excess dependence on agriculture. But if allied activities themselves are given enough importance with a lot of planning and funding for them, and if their market and other requirements are taken care of, not just to manufacturing, but by doing these also, that excess from agriculture can be diverted to make agriculture competent.
Yes, Madam Finance Minister. Firstly, to congratulate you and say it's great to see your mastery of the facts and the issues that face India, considering that you've been in this job for a very short period of time and you were doing something very different. And that's actually reassuring. My question is around the high bar that the Prime Minister has set. The growth that is required to get to the number that he's talking about is actually much higher than what has been achieved in the last 5 years, which have been pretty good years. The Indian growth story has been a good story globally. But yet one sees that joblessness in India is high. Anecdotally, certainly those are the reports. And there is a severe credit crunch, which you spoke about. And so my question is, do you think the moves that the government is making are going to be sufficient to solve the credit crunch? Because instructing the public sector banks to extend credit is one thing, but tackling really the crux of the issue, why this problem exists and has existed over the last 5 years. You've been around for a while now in the government. Addressing those issues, number one, that do you think you can actually, what gives you the confidence that you can actually get through that and get to this high bar that the Prime Minister is setting? And on the joblessness front too, it is great to have pro-growth policies, but you need to have something in terms of a vision that is actually pretty spectacular to address the issue of joblessness in India. So I'd love to hear some comments on that.
I think anything that you talk about the Indian economy, not just today, since our independence, has always been spectacular. The diversity, the enormity, the regional disparities, all of them make it all the more complex. There's no doubting that. But you're right, the Prime Minister has set a very high bar and we have to perform to reach that. And at no point in time, I hope I did not, any point in time of my speaking, I did not convey that I've done enough, the economy has to revive now. No. I shall keep doing. I shall keep responding. I shall keep responding to the global developments as much as domestic developments. I shall keep responding to the macro as much as sectoral. So it's a completely dynamic approach that this government has taken towards handling the economy. And therefore, as a result, I would think if that tempo is maintained, we should be able to reach the target we've set for ourselves. I don't want my statement to be sounding any bit with overconfidence, not at all. But I won't be underestimating the ability of the Prime Minister and the entire team, which is known for hard work, hard, meaningful work. Delivering targets, delivering promises, we take seriously. So I'm sure we'll be able to move forward in that direction.
अगर आपको हमारी वीडियो पसंद आई तो हमारा चैनल हर्ष की बात लाइव सब्सक्राइब करें और नोटिफिकेशंस के लिए बेल आइकन प्रेस करें।